We're gonna start recording now that most people are here. So just as a reminder for those that came in a little bit late, there's two parts to our lecture. There's one where it's going to be more of a lecture, and the second part, it's going to be an opportunity to have more interaction and question and answers. The question and answer part will not be recorded. And the idea for that is that we can have some privacy for people who are sharing that is not going to be in video. For those that cannot be here for the lecture, that will be available online for anybody that wants to see it. So as a recap, the focus of the lecture will be on supporting people who are currently being impacted by trauma. And that current impact requires appropriate support. And that's the best thing that we do, create enough support to prevent long-term consequences of trauma and begin to develop resiliency. And that resiliency, it's not something that we achieve as a goal. It's a space that is created that allows us to manage horrible, complicated things in life without them being something that has a permanent shaping in who I am as an individual. So we're going to cover some ideas on that. And before we get going, and the reason that I want to start with this is because this is one of the basic things that it's important for us to be aware of. There's going to be some ideas a little bit later on simple things that we can do. And that's the key word. When we're working with someone who's being impacted by something that is beyond our control, like a war, it's completely outside of our control, but yet it impacts every fiber of our life. The intervention needs to be adjusted to the simplest thing that we can do. So there's no big emotional processing that's going to happen. There's no big, therapeutic technique that we need to apply. We literally need to go back to the basics. And what are the basics? Breathing, right? That's the first thing that we need to do. Breathing exercises are some of the most wonderful interventions that we could do when somebody's under high distress, because that's the first thing that autonomic nervous response into the sympathetic response of survival begins by shallow breathing, so we could get ready to fight or flight. Another very important thing that we do is grounding exercises. And that's where I want to start today. So I want to share with you one of my favorite grounding exercises. Some of the people that have been with me in other trainings have done something similar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the exercise first. And then I'm going to talk about why I think this exercise is beneficial. So I'm trying to do a couple of things at once. One is to help us all settle into today and just do a little grounding, that it's always beneficial. And second, to go over what are some of the ways that we can support people by a 5-minute exercise to begin to create space for resiliency, because that's the underlying goal of the exercise. All right, so I'm going to invite you to just find a comfortable space in the chair that you're on. The only thing is I'm going to ask you if you could have both feet on the floor if possible. And just adjust your body so it feels comfortable enough. And if you can, close your eyes or find a place where you could focus on the background and a soft gaze if you want to keep your eyes open. And just take a moment and notice your breath. Just the natural flow of your breath without trying to change it or modify it in any way. Noticing the natural rhythm of your breath as you inhale and exhale. And as you notice your breath, begin to expand your awareness to the parts of your body that are making contact with the chair or sofa that you're sitting in. Notice your body being supported now. Bringing special attention to your feet resting on the floor. And as you bring your awareness to the ground under your feet, and as best as you can, be present in the moment. Notice if there's any part within your body that has shifted to a more neutral or calm space. And if you get pulled away by any discomfort or even painful sensation, just notice that and allow your attention to swing back to the parts within your body that might feel more neutral or calm, even in the smallest way. And do this as many times as you need. Take your time. As a way to begin to bring this exercise to a closing, I'm going to invite you to do a scan of your body from the top of your head all the way down to the soles of your feet. And noticing any part within your body that has shifted to a more neutral or calm place since we started. Once again, take your time. Whenever you're ready at your own pace, you can begin to bring yourself back to the room where you're at, slowly coming back, and open your eyes whenever you're ready. All right. So now that we're hopefully a little more grounded, let me tell you why I like this exercise. And this is something that I'll learn along the way. It's not something that I invented, but there's a couple parts of it that for me are really valuable, especially when we're working with someone who has high levels of stress and there's a loss of so many things that provide normal safety and grounding in space. It allows a small moment of creating a space of being present and being grounded and having a space wherever we are. So that's one little piece of it, that in the smallest way, I could create a resource within my body that allows me to have a space of respite. There's another component within it that is really, really important beyond the body presence and awareness and grounding, which is to look for spaces within the body that are neutral or calm. And that's important, that we don't use relaxation exercises when we're working with people who need to create resources. Because doing a relaxation exercise, as wonderful as they are, right? And I think they're beneficial. But when you invite people to look for relaxed experiences within their body, when their whole system has been under threat, when their whole life has been disjointed. It's really not possible for a lot of them. And what we want to avoid is a sense of failure when we're doing a resource exercise. So looking for neutral, it's key. We could add calm, we could add relax afterward, but looking for neutral, because neutral is much better than uncomfortable or stress. The other really important component that is basic in healing trauma, but even more basic in creating resources, is the ability to pendulate between discomfort and comfort. So that simple invitation that if you get pulled away, come back as many times as you need. It's once again teaching a very important skill in a small way to be able to come to parts within us that feel a little more resourced. And then when I'm doing this in psychotherapy, at the end of the process, I ask, does this exercise have meaning for you or not? And when you're doing psychotherapy, that's an important question to ask, especially the or not part, because we want to give permission for it to have no meaning. But I didn't include it here on purpose, because right now what we're doing is building basic resources, right? If they share that it was meaningful for them, wonderful. But we need to shift our approach when we're providing support for trauma that is happening. We're not looking to make deep connections or go into deep emotional processing. In a lot of ways, that could be much more destructive, because if we start unfolding trauma when the person has no place to be safe, we're missing the most important part of what we do as therapists, which is to create a space that is safe. So we're going to be talking a little bit later as well as creating safety when we have challenges. But I want to shift to talking a little bit more about the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is key because it is the part of our psyche or our nervous system that is in charge of protecting us and keeping us alive. And that protection and keeping us alive, this is where Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory brought a lot of value in understanding how this works. There is a part of our system that is constantly looking in the environment, within ourselves, and in the relationship with the environment, for ways that we protect ourselves, for possible threats. And in this looking for possible threats, it's awareness without consciousness. So we are reacting to things that could potentially be dangerous and protecting ourselves before we are even aware consciously that there might be there. So we're going to do a brief little exercise before we go into the theory. So you get a first person sense of what I'm talking about with neuroception. So the exercise is pretty simple. I'm just going to show you a series of pictures. And as you're seeing the pictures, my invitation is just to pay attention to what happens for you. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, whatever it might come up for you. Just be curious about the reaction, or nothing. That's also a possibility. So just notice as we're going through the exercise and you see the different images that come into the screen, what is it that you might notice and what grabs your attention about it? So I'll be silent for a moment and I'm just gonna share my screen and just notice what happens for you. All right. Just curious if anybody wants to share anything that you noticed from going through the different images. If you want, just unmute yourself and just go for it.
I thought it was interesting. The guy standing in the middle of the street, the extremes that I felt watching as a clinician, my first thought was, I hope he's not trying to kill himself. And then my second thought was, is he just having a mindfulness moment in the middle of the street, out in the middle of nowhere? So it was the extremes that I found surprising that came to mind in such a simple image.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Anything else that grabbed people's attention?
Some of the pictures showed growth, harmony, midst of nature, happiness, family.
Yes.
While some of the pictures showed illness, old age, crowds, pollution. And there also I saw some promise like development, economy. And there were some normal pictures like a normal day, whatever happened. So I saw extremes of things. Some of them brought smiles to my face, like the one with the shoes on top of a pregnant lady's stomach.
Yes.
Some of them deep sorrow was there when I saw a child being dental treatment being given to a child, or they were. So some of them were unpleasant, some of them were worrisome, but some of them showed a lot of happiness and promise.
Thank you. One more person. Yes.
I feel that a lot of some of the pictures take a minute for you to access, what you're feeling, because the nuance of catching your own feeling, like when you look at the concert crowd, then based on the lens you're taking, it can be, oh yeah, happy times, versus, oh my god, so many people, so overwhelming. So I mean, like some pictures are like the puppy and the, like she pointed out about the pregnant lady's belly and everything. Some pictures were really clear out there, like, you look at it and you tap into what it is. Some require a little bit of a pause, and you use this pause a little more.
Thank you. Thank you, the three of you. And I just wanted a couple of opinions for people who share their experience. And you could see how many different possibilities are within that, right? From a clinician to the different perceptions of a crowd, or the different emotions depending on the situation. Some feel sad, some feel warm, some feel welcoming, some feel threatening. And we're looking at pictures, right? Yes, it was a little bit of a setup for me, but we're looking at pictures, and just looking at the picture creates a reaction, right? And that is the essence of neuroception. It's immediate. We pick up millions of little cues from our environment that let us know, is this safe or not? Is this enjoyable or not? Past experience, of course, goes into play. So the value in understanding how powerful neuroception is because it helps us understand that when we're in an impactful situation, it's going to be picking up a lot of different little cues to keep us alive. Because at the end of the day, that is the purpose of the autonomic nervous system. It regulates our breathing, it regulates our heart rate, all those things that we don't even need to think about, but are keeping us alive. This is one more. So I'm going to share a couple more slides here to share the information that we're talking about. So as I mentioned before, when we're talking about neuroception, it's perception without awareness. And this detection it's picking up primarily life-threatening dangers. Now, what does that mean? As we saw from the pictures, an image can mean different things for different people depending on their experience and their reality. So, but it's also something that's happening inside. When we get a feeling or a sensation, there's something that's happening and there's telling us there's something uncomfortable. We meet somebody for the first time And without even knowing them, we have a sense of them. We feel close to them, we feel we trust them, or we feel this sense this person feels unsafe. We haven't even had a conversation with them. And our neuroception is already telling us there's something here that you need to pay attention to. It's not always right. It's not always correct, right? Because once again, it's trying to keep you alive. It's not trying to figure out if the data is accurate. It's just trying to make sure that you know that there's something that you need to pay attention. And there's also another part of it that is in the relationship in between. So it's not just looking to the outside. It's not just looking to what's happening for me. It's in the interaction. So when you think about it, it's in every fiber of our relating to the world. There's a part of our system that is telling us this is safe, this is not. Now, there are different ways that we react within this response of protectiveness. The sympathetic response is the most common response that we have to possible threats, real or not, perceived inside or outside. The sympathetic response is very well known. We all heard about the fight or flight response, that something happens, that it's a threat, your body gets ready to either fight or run. And when there is no possibility of fighting or running, it just gets stuck in our system. However, there is a very, very basic primitive response that we share with every being that has a nervous system, and that's why it's called the reptile response, because reptiles are actually really, really good at surviving. And that's the parasympathetic vagal response, which we know as the freeze response. But it's not just freeze in the sense that we're literally frozen. That's one of the ways that we get protected. It's dissociation, it's numbness, it's falling asleep, it's feeling that the world is far away. As unpleasant as those responses are, they're basic in our survival. Because when we have that fight or flight as an initial response, and that is not possible, basically our nervous system says, since you're probably not going to survive this, we might as well turn off the lights so you're in less pain. But the situations that trigger this, most of the time, are not necessarily life-threatening, where that is not just black and white. So when we're working with people who have experience or are coming up from a place of their life truly being in danger, like a war, of their home being either physically destroyed or just destroyed in the sense that is lost for an unknown period of time, we're going to be working with people that are going to be stuck in either a sympathetic or the vagal response. It's important for us to be aware so we can adjust the way that we connect with them. So the final part of this hierarchy of response, which is the place where we can be relatable, is when we're able to be in a space of safety. So the threat has passed. I'm able to regulate back into a place where I'm able to be in connection. So contact happens in the ventral response, right? When we're able to have a sense that the threat has ended, and I'm able to be present enough to be in relationship with others. Now, when you're surviving, there is no place for safety. Safety is actually the most dangerous experience that you can have, because what happens when we're safe? We rest and our guard is down. So we need to adjust our interventions. We need to adjust our ability to connect with others from an understanding that they're going to be protected. Now, here's the other beautiful thing that as a Gestalt therapist really resonates for me. The most interesting thing about the autonomic nervous system is that there's a co-regulation. So just like the neuroception is picking up threats, it's also picking up what feels safe. So if I am sitting with the other and I'm trying as best as I can to stay within my resources and regulation and stay in that ventral response where I could be present, where I could be available for contact, where I could be available for support, that is also going to be picked up by the other person's nervous system. And there's a correlation that happens that if I am staying in that place long enough, their nervous system is going to pick that up. The reason that I think this is beautiful is because it allows us to create an intervention, quote unquote, that is not intervening. It's our presence is the intervention. our ability to be present with the other and create enough space for safety to happen. Now, this is not always easy and it's challenging. It doesn't mean that we don't have an empathic response to what's happening for the other. But what it does mean is that we have the responsibility as clinicians to be mindful of where we are in this hierarchy of response. And especially when we're trying to support someone that we know are going to be in either that high mobilization of energy to protect themselves or that dissociated protection of the freeze response. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma in general terms, and then we'll go into the specifics, because it's important to understand that when we talk about trauma, it's not the event. And a lot of the times we over focus on the event. What trauma truly is what's happening inside of us. So it's the reshaping that happens to who I am, how I see the world, how I see myself in it. So as we're focusing on understanding the impact that situations are happening, as big as a war is, and as impactful as it is, what's going to make the most meaningful intervention is for us to see how it's impacting that individual. Because at the end of the day, once I'm removed from the threat of the immediacy that might be happening, and I find a space that's potentially safer, what has not changed is what's happening inside, because that's what we carry wherever you are. And understanding trauma, this is one of the best definitions I've found so far with Stephen Porges, which trauma is a chronic disruption of connectiveness. That's truly the biggest impact of trauma. It gets in the way of my ability to connect with myself in the world. So we're going to be sitting with someone who is understandably impacted and dysregulated, who understandably does not feel safe. And we are with them in a moment where we can provide minimal, truly minimal support to the reality of their life. We can't change the war. We can't change the impact that it had in their life. We cannot change the reality of the world that we're in. The only piece that we have control is how we are with them in the brief moment that we are, which is significant, because one of the things that happen often as a way of survival is to either try to minimize what happened to move on. And it's a great mechanism to survive. But when we create enough space to say, I can be with you with the impact that is real, and that your pain can be seen, that is the most important intervention that we could do with trauma, to be seen. If you think about it, right? In your own stories, whatever that might be, one of the most destructive experiences that happen is when my pain is not seen and I have to live with it on my own. And I create a belief that I need to carry this by myself, and then no one else can see it or trust it or believe it. So that is the most important intervention when we're working with trauma, to be able to let the other person know that they're being seen. And it's not being seen by letting them just know verbally, I'm seeing you, truly being able to sit with their pain. And this is when our job becomes complicated, and be able to manage to stay with them in the best way that we can in a supportive place, right? Because we have a responsibility when we're working with people, and we hold some responsibilities when we're in this healing profession. And one of them is that we are the ones that provide the space for healing to create in some support. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are some things that we can do, right? And this is not necessarily something unique. It's more of a recap than something that most of us will not be already aware of. But the idea is that resourcing is the best thing that we could do, right? The breathing exercises I mentioned before, But the here and now exercises, they're simple ways that we can use our senses to come back to the present. And a lot of the times, and I know this is true for me, when I'm working with people that are in tremendous amount of pain, my focus sometimes is, how can I provide support and healing for this huge pain that you're going through? And forget the most important thing is, do they have enough resources to even manage the day-to-day and not necessarily go into this deep processing of pain? And those basic resources are actually the best intervention that we can provide, because it's going to help them navigate the intensity of what the world is already bringing to them. So I'm sure we all have tons of exercises that fall into those categories. So as I mentioned before, we're not going to go over every single exercise, every single possibility, because there's plenty of resources we all have. As long as you've been doing this, I'm sure that you have at least a couple for each one of those categories. What I'm trying to highlight here is not what you do, is why you do it, right? So the what is whatever exercise you like and you feel efficient. The why is, this is the part where we get to support people on beginning to create a space for resiliency. And resiliency is not, handling life without being affected by it, right? That's denial, not resiliency. Resiliency is to be able to support people in creating enough space to be able to manage the ups and downs of the life situation, knowing that it's impossible for anybody, especially in the midst of a horrific war or conflict that is affecting their daily life. It's impossible for anybody to just constantly maintain this perfect life balance of resiliency. We're all going to be knocked out of it, right? And it's important to understand that being out of it is not the problem, right? Because there are sometimes situations that are completely out of our control, life situations that are going to take us out of our resiliency. But the thing that it's important to be aware is that the resilience is also not a stuck point where I have this space of resiliency and forever in my life, I'm going to have the same level of resiliency. When life situations that are massive happen, our resilience becomes very reduced. So things that and you probably hear this with people, things that I was able to manage before, suddenly I cannot. And this, we're talking about war, but this could be a horrific car accident. This could be a horrific loss. Things that have a deep impact in our life that come out of nowhere and suddenly our whole reality has changed. So part of what we're working towards is helping create resources to expand that resiliency zone. We're not going to be able to do huge expansions, but if we could give them just a little brief expansion of the resiliency. So one part of supporting resiliency is the resourcing, the bringing skills that are going to help manage. The other part, it goes into a little bit more of what we can do clinically. So for the last few years, I've been working on this idea of this compassion and relational Gestalt model for trauma work. I'm not going to go into all of it today because that's not why we're here. But when we're working, as I mentioned in the beginning, when we have the luxury of time in an office to work with someone on healing and creating that possibility of healing, there is a point where we get to the opportunity to begin to do some amazing deep trauma work. And within that, there's different things that we pay attention to. Now, when we're working with recent trauma, this expand of what we can do becomes focused on just a few parts. And that's what I want to highlight today. So the first part is the safety and stabilization. And I use the analogy of the tree or a plant because that part of the ground that creates all the nutrients and the possibility for that tree to grow, that's the most basic component of what we do when we're working with trauma. we start by creating safety and resources to create enough stabilization to be able to explore more. We're going to need to primarily focus on this and all the resources that I mentioned before, because creating enough safety when safety is completely gone, it's a challenge. And creating enough support to have some resources. Now, we're going to have to be working in a very different pace when we're working with people who are in refugees or people who have family that are being impacted by this, because our time to be with them sometimes is very limited. I have had some work with some clinicians that are supporting children in refugee camps, and their ability to intervene is limited sometimes to a few hours a week, and then the children go somewhere else, right? Because this is constantly moving. But in those few hours, we could do enough to move the needle of resiliency just a couple notches. And that's really what we're doing here, right? We're not going to be the savior of the situation. But what we can do is just create a couple of drops of resiliency, and that's already meaningful. So there's a big part where we're just literally creating the ground so there's enough space for them to feel safe. And within that, the two basic, and I talked a little bit about this, the two most important things, this is true with any trauma work that we do, the two most important things that we can do is to witness and communicate and validate the experience. Because if you think about that, it's not just that I'm here listening to you and seeing you. To witness is more than just to see. To witness is to truly bear witness that I am here, that I am noticing, that I am aware, that I am present with you. That presence does not require a whole lot of words. Words are important, but it's just knowing that somebody is truly sitting with you and seeing and validating your experience. The validation of the experience, once more, is not just saying, yes, I believe you, yes, I see you. Yes, the words are important, but the validation of the experience happens when you know that someone is truly here with you. So there's a level of connectiveness that needs to happen for that to be true. But those bottom three are the most important parts and what we really can provide. And sometimes we don't get beyond safety and civilization, right? Because the reality is that there's so much that can happen that we just drop a couple pieces of sand on that creating that ground for something else. But what we need to understand is that that's already more than the world is giving. And I think that's the valuable part of our job. That in the way that we relate to people, in the way that we're present with an understanding that what we're doing is enough, it's already meaningful. That there could be someone across whatever might be screen, seat, room, that can sit in this place of connectedness. Now, there is going to be some protectors that are going to be in play. And what I mean by protectors is all the ways that we have of the core beliefs, the fixed gestalts, the introjections, whatever it might be, or what I believe the world is or who I am in the world. The reason that I left that is because in the making space for them means we don't fight with them. We don't argue with them. We just let them be for whatever space they need to be. And there's always the possibility that meeting happens, right? So I that's another one that was left there, even though that's the very top, at the very end of the process. There's always the sense that just by somebody witnessing and communicating and being with me has a sense of meaning in my life. So we never want to stop exploring meaning, but we need to understand that that is not necessarily the goal ever, right? Especially now. But the most basic interventions of presence and connectiveness are the most valuable. And it comes to what I think this is true for anything, that our role as therapists are these three basic concepts. One is to provide safety. But when I talk about safety, it's important to understand that safety is not the absence of threat. Safety is the ability to connect. Now, that's the safety we provide. It's not the safety we expect, right? So we don't expect people to be safe with us. And this is really, really important because they need to go to whatever process they need to go to in order to feel comfortable with the other. But we bring a space of safety. And the safety that we can bring is with our willingness to connect, where our willingness to be the responsible being in the room that is willing to be in contact with the other, right? We could talk about contact for ages, especially as Gestalt therapists. But what I'm talking about in terms of our responsibility of contact, I'm going to tell you my belief about it. I think that the best way, almost the only way, but definitely the best way that we're able to provide contact for the other is where our own ability to be vulnerable. If I'm, as a clinician, I'm not able to be vulnerable with the other, it's really, really hard for contact to happen. By vulnerability, I mean the willingness to be in all that I can be, as in the best way that I can, to be open to the experience of the other, to be able to be present with the other and open to receive the other. So if you think about just those two, in being able to be willing to connect with where the other might be, and in being able to be as vulnerable as I can, depending on the situation, to be present with the other. What I mentioned earlier about witnessing and communicating and being present and validating the experience, it's less of a verbal interaction and more of creating a space where the possibility of exploring becomes real. So it doesn't mean that we have to be in this mega open and vulnerable and in this kind of like almost like elevated human experience, because we're human as well. What it means is the willingness to be present and the willingness to be fully engaged with the other, be it for 5 minutes or an hour. And that's something that we can provide, and it has tremendous amount of value when someone has been experiencing a constant disconnect and needing to survive through losing and adapting and losing and adapting. So to be able to be with someone that could just be present with them for a moment and let their experience of pain be what's the most important moment in that relationship, that already begins to create something different. Now, I personally believe that hope is as well part of our responsibility. And when I say hope, I'm not talking about optimism. I'm not talking about things are going to be okay, you know, everything's going to be all right. That's not hope, right? That's blind optimism that helps no one. When I'm talking about hope, it's much more than just the words or the encouragement. For me, what hope is, and once again, this is a very personal belief, is that I know that what I'm doing in this moment and in the space that I'm sitting here with you, as small as it is in the grand scheme of life, that it's meaningful because it creates the possibility for healing in even the smallest way. That is hopeful for me, that as humans, we can be with each other in a meaningful way that creates the possibility of healing to be true. And the reason that is hopeful for me is that it allows me to continue to do this, even when the situation for the other is in this dire, horrible place, that it's unfixable, because I cannot fix the fact that the war is happening and that you lost your home. But I can sit with you here and be in a human to human connection that creates the possibility for you to at least know that for me in this moment, you're a valuable human being and your life journey deserves to be paid attention to, deserves to be validated. Herb Polster has a wonderful book that I think the title is enough. I mean, you should read the book, but the title is enough. And it's Every Person's Life Deserves a Novel. And our job as clinicians is to help them realize that. Now, these moments of deep impact that we're talking about, that principle is still true. To be fully engaged and let the other person know that their story is valuable, their losses are significant, and we provide them with a safe space for that to be held and attended to. And even in the smallest way, grab onto some of that hope. Now, hope is different for other people. We all have our own version of what that means. But the invitation is that we don't lose the fact, and I choose my word very, very attentively that I'm using the word fact, that there's a fact that when humans come together, there is the possibility that we can create enough space for loving, for healing, for connectedness. Might not be always easy. There's a lot of evidence of the opposite, but there's enough sense that there's something within us that is useful, valuable, connected. And that's what hope is for me. That is, as long as I remember this, despite all the horror, despite all the horrible stories, despite all the pain that I sit with on a daily basis with my clients, despite all the horrific things that humans do to humans, there's another part of humanity that is very loving and caring. And I think that for me, I need to grab onto that. Sometimes with one hand, sometimes I need to grab onto it with my whole body, depending on the situation. Because it allows me to know that what we're doing is meaningful. And when we're facing horrific events that have no reason to be justified, and that's not just this war, that's pretty much every war. Most of them, there might be a couple there that maybe we're not going to get into the argument of the justification of war, but for the most part, hurting others, it just doesn't feel like that's what our role as humans is. But there's something that we can do to create small moments of a different reality. That there's another way that humans can support each other and care for one another. So that is the end of the quote unquote formal lecture. So I want to open the forum to questions, interactions, anything about what I said or didn't say or thoughts. So from this moment on, I'll stop the recording.